Hi, I'm Sarah Hagalberger. I'm going to be talking about how to take care of yourself while taking care of others. So I know that being a student leader can be a lot sometimes. I know that sometimes it means that we are carrying the burdens of others while we're also trying to learn how to take care of ourselves because you're in classes and you're doing student events and there's just a lot going on. And so I want to share a little bit about my own story, talk a little bit about like trauma a little bit and like what trauma entails, because sometimes when we're working with people who have been through traumatic things, big or small, big T traumas or little T traumas, we can be affected by those things. And so it's really important that we learn how to take care of ourselves so that we can help others take care of themselves. And in that, helping others can then lead to them going out into the world well as you going out into the world well. So with that, I'm going to get started. So when I was a junior in college, I was a resident assistant, an RA. I know they're called different things on different campuses sometimes. So I was an RA, and my first semester had been pretty slow. I had had a little bit of, I don't know, maybe like a couple conduct things and lots of events, maybe a little bit of roommate issues, but nothing that felt like it weighed on me a whole lot. But my biggest thing was time management. I had no idea how to manage my time. And I found myself getting really exhausted like over time as I went. And so I kind of just let that weigh on me. I just let it keep happening because I figured, this job isn't as hard as I maybe thought it was going to be. And so I'm okay. But then come my spring semester, my first year being an RA, I ended up being an RA for 2 years. I had a student come to me and she was like, yeah, last night something really hard happened to me and I need help walking through it. And so I didn't really know how to respond. I mean, I knew how I had been trained to respond. I'd been through behind closed doors, I had been through these scenarios, but being in the real moment compared to being in the behind the scenes hypotheticals is not the same. And so I prayed a lot through it, and I trusted that the Lord was going to give me what I needed to get through that conversation. And He absolutely did. And so as I continued learning how to talk to her through this conversation, I was remembering all of my training. I was like, okay, like I need to remember like who to talk to about this and where to report this. And oh, she can go to the counseling center. And oh, I need to fill out this form and all of these things. And I got so caught up in the midst of trying to help her with everything and trying to learn how to go through the process of everything that I just completely forgot that I needed to take care of myself too. And so unfortunately, not unfortunately, it was really good. But she had gone through a lot of healing in that semester. She had been working through trying to learn how to take care of herself, trying to get back on track with school, going to counseling sessions. And throughout all of this, she kept wanting to tell me what was going on and how it was going. And she went from being a student of mine to becoming a dear friend. But along the way, I realized, wow, this is a lot on me. And sometimes I would leave feeling just so worn down and like I had nothing left to give to my schoolwork. I would get calls in the middle of the night every once in a while, and I would just go and take them, not even thinking about the fact that I had a class or the next day or a test. And I just had no idea how to care for myself and all of that. So then that following summer, I found myself still worrying about her so much, wondering, is she okay? Is she doing okay? What's going on? And yet she was fine. And so it wasn't until somebody else came to me and said, Sarah, I think that you're experiencing vicarious trauma, that I realized, oh my gosh, I think I am. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, what can happen when we pour ourselves into our jobs. But that's just a little bit of where some of my heart behind this workshop is coming from. So I do want to give a quick disclaimer that somebody started playing the piano here. So if you hear it, let that be some joyful background noise. Campus storms are fun. So I really want to help you guys learn how to be a part of somebody else's story in a way that also helps you learn that it's a part of yours. So sometimes when we're walking with people through really big and hard things, it is such an honor. Like maybe you have somebody in mind that in the past, whether it was in high school or earlier in college, or maybe yesterday, and somebody shared something with you that feels really big and really, really important in their life. And you feel like, wow, I am so honored that they chose to share that with me. And I also don't know what to do with it. And so I just want to remind you that yes, you are carrying somebody else's story, and there's a lot of honor in that. And there's a lot of beauty in that. And also the experience that you have learning about yourself with that person is also part of your story. And there's a way to carry somebody else's story in your story, both well, and to honor both stories. So, I love this topic. So a little bit of what can happen when we start carrying a lot of heaviness from somebody else's story. Say somebody comes to you and they're carrying a lot of mental health, or they've experienced assault in the past, or maybe they're going through disordered eating right now. There's a lot of heavy things that can happen that a lot of trainings talk about. And what can happen when we're constantly engaging with them and not putting them anywhere, not storing them well in our bodies and in our minds, is that they can start to build up and build up and build up. And I think one of the most common words that's used for this is burnout. And so there's a couple other terms that I want to give you guys just to give a little bit of vocabulary to what you might be going through, or what somebody around you might be going through. So burnout is one. It's probably the most common. You can think burnout, I'm working a lot, I feel exhausted, I have nothing left to give. So being unable to cope with the continual emotional stress of helping people with their psychological, social, or physical problems is burnout. So I'll repeat that one again. Burnout is being unable to cope with the continual emotional stress of helping people with their psychological, social, or physical problems. So that encompasses a lot. Continuing unable to cope with the continual emotional stress. So that's when somebody is giving you a lot and you are feeling stressed and you're feeling emotional and you're like, I don't know how to handle this over and over and over again. And it keeps happening. And sometimes it's psychological. Sometimes it feels like it's in relationships. Sometimes it feels like it's within your body. It can happen in a lot of different ways. And so over and over, it just builds up and it's a continual emotional stress. Another one that is kind of similar but different is compassion fatigue. So, compassion fatigue focuses on the sum of reactions to traumas and working with multiple people. So, this one is similar in some ways, but it takes a little bit of a different kind of toll. So, think about when someone shares something really hard with you and you feel emotionally drawn to them, and you're like, wow, this person, like, I feel a lot of empathy for them. I feel a lot of compassion for them. I'm trying to learn how to appreciate their story and also how to hold it well. And so focusing on like the sum of all of that. So when that's happening with multiple people and there's so much compassion going out to this person and this person and this person all the time, and you just don't know how to handle all of it, and then all of a sudden you have nothing left to give out, like that is compassion fatigue. It's like my compassion is worn out, my empathy is worn out. I want to give it and I don't know how. So that's compassion fatigue. And then vicarious trauma, which is what I was talking about more at the beginning, is a negative emotional response developed in response to the trauma that someone in close proximity is experiencing. So that's when there's like one very specific person and they're sharing a lot with you. They're pouring a lot into you. You're trying to pour a lot into them. There's a lot of very direct communication. And it is where that empathy and that close proximity are combined, like, and that proximity is there for a long period of time, that vicarious trauma happens, which basically means that the person who is caring for the person in the trauma, the helper, starts carrying some of the emotional, like traumatic responses. So they start feeling the same symptoms as the other person, not because they're going through it, but because they're so closely related. So those are three of many different terminology that can go with when we are caring for others and we just get exhausted and burnt out. So in all of this, I want to give you guys a couple ways that you can be working to carry yourselves well, both in and out of these situations, so that you can continue to carry yourself well in your own life. Because being an RA, being a chaplain, being in student government, being in student activities, wherever you are on campus, like, you are working with people and you are caring for them very directly. And sometimes that's in a way of like, yeah, we're going to put on this event together. And sometimes it's a worship event. Sometimes it's a painting event or a musical event. I don't know what it is, but life doesn't stop when those things happen. And sometimes people walk into an event and they're just feeling very heavy and worn down and carrying a lot. And they happen to see a student leader in front of them and they say, "You, please help me." And you're like, okay, how do I do that? And so as you walk into those things and you take the trainings that you've experienced in the past with you, here's a couple of things that you can use as you move forward. So I kind of broke them down into 3 ways that you can take care of yourself well. So the first is rest. The second is talking about like internal and external processing. And then the third is moving your body. So from the idea of rest, I think it's used a lot. We talk about rest in the context of sleep. We talk about it in the context of our bodies, and we talk about it in the context of the world around us. And so what does rest actually mean? So I really think that it's important for us to be making sure that we are planning out time to rest for ourselves and for God, just like He would plan, or take time to plan time for yourself and to plan time for God, just the way you would plan for time for anyone else. So sorry, I mixed that one up a little bit, but yes, it's very important to plan out time for yourself and for God, just in the same way that you would plan out time for anyone else. I think sometimes we look at our schedules and it's like one-on-one class, one-on-one lunch, group project, class, one-on-one, and it's just like all of these things in a row. And then there's some meetings in there, there's event planning in there, there's events that you want to go to that aren't even yours. There's all these things in there. And so we wake up at 8 a.m. and we go to bed at 11 p.m. if we're lucky. And we never even get to take time for ourselves in the midst of that. And that's a long day. Like, that's what, like 16 hours or something? That's a long time. And so making sure that you're planning time for yourself just like you would for anyone else. And so for some, that means waking up really early in the morning and saying like, okay, like this is my time alone with the Lord. And sometimes it's this is my time alone with me, just to like think about where I am, think about where I'm at, be able to move forward well into the day. But I think whether it's in the morning, whether it's at night, whether it's sitting in a coffee shop in the middle of the day, um, there's this idea of like, we are given the ability to rest by God, and we're also being given the ability to work. And so, how do we want to choose to talk about those? Do we want to choose to rest so that we can work, or do we want to choose to work until we can rest? And so, I think looking at both of those and deciding, like, why do I work and why do I rest? And where do I see the patterns of the Lord in that? And so, I think if we look at creation, for example, we want to be able to rest so that we can work from that rest, so that we can continue to be energized and move forward well, not working so that we can rest. I think when we work all day and are just looking forward to the weekend and saying like, oh, Friday, Saturday, when I get there, it'll be so good. And if we work like that, I think we lose sight of what rest is really for. I think rest is maybe to energize us and to give our souls like restoration so that we can continue to move forward well out of that into the week. And then when we finish that week well, we get to rest again and say it was a good week, but then we also get to move forward into the next week. So I think changing our minds around rest and what we perceive it as is one huge way that we can move forward well. Another one, so internal and external processing. It's really interesting to think about how our brains work and how our thoughts are processed and our emotions are processed. And so, like, the brain is the powerhouse of most living creatures. And for the human experience, the brain not only tells our bodies what they need, but it also tells us how to hold like pieces of what we might need later and what we've had in the past. And so as we continue to like use those things that we've learned and what we need in the future, our brain is processing. And so sometimes there are things that happen that allow us to process what's happened years in the past, weeks in the past. And that's incredible that our brains hold that much memory. So I don't know if you're an external or an internal processor, but I would say take a minute and think back. So when you think about how have you continued, or how do you find yourself getting to a point, like a thought point? So say you've done a lot, you're doing a lot, maybe it's in classes, maybe it's through life experience, and you're thinking through, oh yeah, like this and this and this and this. Oh, that's what it all means. Like, is that what's happening? Like, are you thinking through all of those things? Is it in your alone time when you're like sitting and reading, or maybe on a walk and it's all in your head and it's moving? Or is it when you're sitting in a conversation and you're talking to somebody and you're like externally processing, like, what is going on? Like, how can I connect all of these things together? And it's in the midst of you telling it out loud that it all connects. And so it's a very, very simplified version of internal and external processing. But and I think there can be definitely a combination of both in some way. But thinking about like, how do I best process, and understanding how your own individual brain is working is really helpful as you go out into the world. So for somebody who's an internal processor, a really good way to give yourself space is to schedule that time alone. So I think sometimes we find ourselves like, oh, I'm just waiting for a doctor's appointment or something. And when you're waiting for that, you have time alone. But what is it like if maybe instead of just sitting alone when you find the random time to be alone, if you schedule it out and you say, yeah, from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., I'm going to sit alone and I'm just going to let my brain do what it does. Maybe I'm going to go on a walk. Maybe I'm going to draw. I don't know what that looks like for you. But taking time alone to let your brain mend and melt and see what's going on and put pieces together. For external processors, I say like find a really trusted friend, maybe your supervisor or a family member, and talk through what's going on with them and be able to connect what's going on. I will say I am an external processor, and I have found it really difficult to find safe spaces to process on campus sometimes, because a lot of people are connected to a lot of people. And so I just also want to say, like, whether you're internal or external processor, like therapy is always a good option. And I just want to say that to like destigmatize therapy. I know a lot of people are talking about it, but I just want to be another voice that says like therapy is good and it's there for a reason. And you don't have to have the lowest moment to realize that you need it. You can start saying like, hey, like I'm doing really well And I want to continue to learn how to be really healthy. And so I think I'm going to start going to therapy to learn how to do that better. And so I just want to say therapy is good. It's not bad. And there's so many different kinds of therapy too. And so if that's something that you've been considering, like I really encourage you, ask questions, go to your campus counseling center, find somebody on campus that's knowledgeable, and maybe pursue that. I think there's a lot of really good things that can come from it. Well, and I know there are because I've experienced them too. But yeah, but I will say if you are an external processor, making sure that you really want to honor the people around you who maybe you need to talk out loud about to order to process it well. And you don't want to talk to that person's roommate to figure it out well, just not a great idea. But maybe it is a therapist, maybe it's your supervisor, maybe it's a friend back home. But finding a way to be able to externally process and do that in a way that honors both the person's story that maybe you're trying to process and your own story, and the fact that you need to work through those things, because that's not a bad thing. And then the last thing that I want to say that's really important for both internal and external processors is journaling. Being able to write down our thoughts and be able to look back at them. How cool is that? Like, I find myself sometimes looking back at journals from like my freshman year of college, and I'm like, wow, I've grown so much. And that is so cool and so beautiful. So that's another cool thing that I would say, journaling. And then the last one is moving your body. So the stress cycle, I don't know if you guys have heard about this. There's a book about the stress cycle. It's really, really good. But learning how to move your body in a way that helps you get the stress in your body out. So when we experience something really tense or really overwhelming, sometimes it gets stored in our body and it sits there because our brains hold it, and our brains are connected to our bodies. And so our bodies hold it. So when people say like, oh, you're holding your tension in your shoulders, for example, that's a really common one. It's like literally the tension is in your shoulders. And so how do you move your body and get it out? And so sometimes it's going on a run. Sometimes it's walking. Sometimes it's maybe doing yoga or playing intramurals. Sometimes it's coloring really hard on a piece of paper or chopping up vegetables really fast. Or there's so many different ways that you can get the stress out of your body, but continuing to move your body well and let your muscles and your brain engage. That's one of the best ways that you can let your brain process through hard things that you're going through. So I really hope that maybe this offered something good to you. I hope that maybe you can think through, what have I been experiencing that's challenging? How can I continue to hold those stories well and also know that this is a part of my story and I need to work through it as well. So with that, I hope that you can take these things. I hope that you can learn from them and learn about yourself. And that as you do that, you can not only move forward well for yourself, but you can also move forward so that you can help others move forward well too. Thanks for listening.